Okay guys, this is Tom Holland for Field Target Tech. Happy Easter to everybody. It is Easter as I create this. As I said I was going to, from one of the posts on one of the forums, I'm going to be taking my 1720T Crossman air pistol apart, and we're going to put some parts into this thing and make it 12 foot-pounds. Now, as you can see, I have a rather long barrel on here, and that is my Crossman Challenger barrel, and that was an experiment that actually did not work. So what we're going to do is we're going to start removing all the parts, and we're going to make this a 12 foot-pound field target gun. It's shooting around 7 foot-pounds now. I'd like to get that up to around like 11 and a half, or at least above 11 minimum. So we're gonna, our target will be somewhere around 11 and a half and a little bit above that. So the first thing that we're gonna do with this is, I've already done it with this, and you should always do this again whenever you work on any of these, is make sure that there is no air in this cylinder. This has been dry fired, so the gauge is at 0, and that is that. So now what we're going to do is we are going to disassemble this and take it completely apart, and I'll show you some parts inside that we're going to change. Now, by grabbing this and shaking it, now that's the trigger making noise, but by shaking this, this makes absolutely no noise. That tells me that the hammer spring in here is directly sitting against the valve. There's no movement. When this thing is done, I'm going to have the same original hammer and striker in this, but I'm going to have a more powerful spring, but the powerful spring will be shorter. So that will be able to move a little bit. And what that free-floating hammer is going to do is going to prevent the bounce back from the valve to hit the valve again and waste air. So the hammer itself is going to be slightly free-floating, and that will prevent a lot of air loss from this. So this has been degassed already, and what we're going to do is we are going to take all this apart, and we are going to first we're going to get the right Allen key here, and we're going to take the stock off. One of the screws is missing for the stock at the moment. I have to find that. I believe it's in this drawer over here. So we're going to take this one screw off. I'm going to put them in these tins over here. So we're going to take the stock and all of that. And over here I have the shroud and the original Lothar Walther barrel that's going to go back onto this. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to slightly hone the inside of this with extremely fine polishing compound attached to a swab like this. And that will smooth out that barrel just a little bit. So we're going to put those aside for the moment. So now that we got that off, what we're going to do is we're going to take the trigger mechanism. Well, we're not going to take the trigger mechanism off first. Hold on with that, and I'll be right back. I have to get some additional tools that I did forget to bring up to the bench here. So I'm going to just take a little bit of a break, and we will come right back with those tools. Okay guys, we're back. I got my tools that I did forget. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the grips off. I like to take everything apart so nothing is in the way of dissecting this. And you can see the adjustment screw for the trigger mechanism in the back. And we take the other side off. And And I like to do that to inspect what's inside, make sure that there's no dirt or anything in there, and all of that. So now that that's off, what we're going to do is we're going to take our other trusty Allen key here, and remove, I'll put this so the camera can see it, and we're going to remove the rear of the screw where it holds the breech fitting in. None of this is all too difficult. It's just a tedious process. This is a square end Allen key. I don't like using the ones with the balls because they tend to round off the insides of the screws. I'd rather just take my time with it and just work its way out. So we have another one on the front here, and we're going to be removing that with this little plate that holds the screw for the stock. So we're going to take that off. Now, get a different Allen key here. I believe it would be this one. Oh, next one up. And these are all regular American size Allen keys. There's nothing on this gun that is metric. Okay, so we got that off with the plate, and we'll put that in a little bin, and the whole trigger assembly comes off. Now this particular trigger is a very nice, sweet trigger mechanism. I'm just going to take these parts out maybe and just clean them a little bit. I'm going to do nothing to this because this is probably one of the sweetest triggers of any pistol that I could possibly have. So I don't have to worry about adjusting this or really doing anything to it. I'm going to leave it alone. Now, a Crosman Challenger trigger assembly can go onto this as well, and that's also an option in building these. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to take the barrel band off. Again, different size Allen key, not that one that I had already. And all these Crosmans in general are very easy guns to work on. They're not difficult, you just have to be careful with them. We'll slide that off, we'll put that in the bin. My next step is what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the gauge. Now this gauge on the underside, I like to put Teflon tape on them, but these shouldn't be too tight. They should be hand tight and maybe a little bit more. This is tight because I put, as you can see once I get it removed, you can see the Teflon tape that I have on it. And that is the gauge block that's hollow down inside. So now what we're going to do is we are going to remove. I have no reason to retain this barrel for any reason, so we're gonna, and these are probably Loctited on because these are the screws that hold the barrel on, and these are blue Loctite. This is not red. Do not use red. In there, and then you can slide the barrel out. I don't recommend doing that because of the transfer port, but we're going to be changing the transfer port as well. We're going to be putting that aside for the moment. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove these 2 screws and these 2 screws, and then the whole breech will be able to come up and off. That's these. So we remove these. And this is all there is to really working on it on these pistols. The Marauder and the 1701 are both two other PCP pistols. They come apart very similar to this. Not exact, but it's the same principle. And we put those screws to the side again in my little bin. And we take the 2 off in the rear. Use that, get a little more leverage. And when the time comes, we're going to be very careful taking this apart, because there is a transfer port and an O-ring in here. I believe I might have put in my own transfer port that I made on the lathe to go in there. I'm not sure. I don't remember. I believe, if I remember correctly, I might have. So we'll see in a minute. And I have all extra O-rings and stuff, so okay. Now, in taking those 2 off, and that bottom one takes off the breech assembly, the end cap, and that has your adjustment for your hammer spring. Yep, and there's the transfer port that I made. There was no washers in that because I made it a little bit on the tight side. As you see, the barrel that came out, the barrel has a, I'm not going to use the big barrel, but I'll use the little one for demonstration. Has a little indent in it where that fits in. And the way I slid that barrel out, it came right out. So that tells me I have to make this a little bit longer when I make my next one. So it gets to be a tight fit in there. I might also take a little bit of rubber glue or something and glue an O-ring to that to seal that. I might do that on both the top and the bottom to help seal it. Just a thin O-ring. I'll have to see, but I'll probably make another one of these regardless, because I'm not really liking that one too much. But we'll save that and put it aside. Okay. Now that we got that off, we'll put that screw in there. And under here, what I'm going to do is, there's no reason to remove it. At the moment, we're going to leave the tray on there. As you see on the top, there's a tray here with 2 screws. There's no reason that we have to remove that in any way, shape, or form. So what we're going to do is we're going to crack this open. We're going to take that screw out, and the bolt comes right out. And we're going to put the breech off to the side because we're finished with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the screw back into the breech. Now there's a little O-ring, as you can see, on the very end of this. I will replace that little tiny O-ring. And as you see, there's some wear marks on here, particularly around that way where the bolt is moved in this fashion. That tells me it's binding a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to polish this with very fine compound on the lathe. And we're going to polish that so it's nice and smooth. And I'm going to do the same thing with the inside of this. I'm going to polish that on the inside with some polishing tools on the lathe, and I'll hone that nice and smooth on the inside, so the next time when this goes in, this is going to be very, very smooth, and there'll be no friction of that whatsoever. So we're going to put these aside for the moment. Now what we're going to do is, so we don't lose them, we're going to take the hammer spring off, and this hammer spring is going to be replaced by a shorter, stronger spring, like I said, because at rest right now that sits against the valve, and what we want to do is we want to have a little bit of play in this so it rattles, so when it strikes the valve spring and bounces off, it has a little bit of space to hit that spring, and there's space not bearing directly against the valve spring, so it'll save a little air to that. So we're going to put this into the tray also. Now the hammer here is a little bit different than on the Marauders and everything. We're going to slide this to the rear, and we're going to pull the pin out. There's a pin here, and it's just a pin that stays in, and that holds your hammer and your striker. Now your striker is adjustable through the center, just like the Marauder rifle and the Marauder pistol is, just on a smaller scale. It's a much smaller screw on the inside of that, and it's a much smaller screw on the end cap. It's the same principle, just scaled down. So we're going to put these off to the side, and that will be that. Now what we do, now what we're left with is we are left with the valve on the inside held by these 3 screws and the gauge block inside and the end piece here. So now the first thing we're going to do is, as you can see, that end piece is a little munged up because I have done this operation more than once. So this should not be all too tight. This should be just hand tight. Ooh, it is on there. That should be hand tight and just maybe a little to hold it. The way that you should be able to even take that by hand and fill it and hold air. It shouldn't, this has no reason to be tight. Hand tight and a little bit tighter so it doesn't come out. As you see, when I remove this, it looks a little dirty in there, and we're going to clean all this up. There's the O-ring, and you can see the O-ring is moist, it's wet with grease, and then the filter at the end. So we're going to do that, and what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to remove this Foster fitting, and I'm going to take the valve out. I'm going to remove the valve completely, because I'm going to attach a bottle to the side of this, and that's going to be regulated to go into the front, so I have a regulated gun from the outside, and the inside of the gun stays the same, because I don't have a regulator that'll fit inside this tube at the moment that works. So now we're left with nothing here to remove. Now the only thing that we have left is these 3 valve screws. We'll take them out, put them in our bin, and you can hear the click. I have blue Loctite on all of these, and we're going to stick this in a solution, and we're going to be cleaning all of these off. Oops. Put that back in the bin. Now all I have to do is use my trusty device here. I'm not going to show this on camera. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of PVC pipe, and I'm going to push it in through this side, and I'm going to push the gauge block and the valve out through the front. So this and the gauge block are going to slide out and come out the front. And I'll show that in a minute. I'm just off camera here that I can. Whoops, that was me. So now we're going to slide that out, and as you can see, there's the gauge block with O-rings on both sides, and it looks like it's a little flattened, so we'll replace those. And I have a spacer between the valve and the gauge block. That's basically what the plenum is for this. And as you see, there's some dirt on that, and that washer is flattened and dry also. It's a little moist, as you can see on my fingers, but we got some gunk in there. We'll take this apart and clear that out. Now, we'll also take this valve spring. This is a strong valve spring. So what I'll do is I will take this apart. I will take this valve apart, and we will put a lighter valve spring into this. That'll give me, help give me my 12 foot-pounds, along with, as I break my light bulb, that will give me my 12 foot-pounds after I get all the parts all straightened out. But basically, that's it. That's all there is to taking a Marauder pistol apart. And there's all the parts. And you need minimal tools. It's not rocket science. It's a very simple gun to take apart. So that being said, we got this all apart. I'm going to spend a day or two cleaning and polishing all of these parts, and I'll come back and I'll put together a video on this reassembly. I'm going to make another size transfer port. It's going to be a little bit more open than what that one is. Again, I'll replace all the parts, and I'll show you all of that on camera. Again, I'd like to say Happy Easter to everybody, and that's all I have for today. Everyone stay safe, because I'm stuck inside here. I'm stuck with a 10-meter range at home, and that's about it. I think a lot of us are in the same boat. So guys, stay safe and have a happy Easter. This is Tom Holland for Field Target Tech.